Okay, we'll do a 2 minutes of previews of coming attractions. So this week and next, I assume it'll take us 2 weeks to get through Perek Chav Daled, Psalm 24. And we'll see in a minute why we're learning it. After that, we're going to do Psalm 30, Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid, in honor of Chanukah. Because although many people say it every day, it is the psalm that is added to Tefillah for Chanukah. And then after that, we're going to do Psalm 118, because I assume we'll be into Chanukah, or close to it, and that's the psalm that finishes Hallel. So the next, not this week, the next 2 weeks will be Chanukah themed, Chanukah and then Hallel. So we'll be seasonally themed. Maybe I'll wear red and green to be seasonally themed. Okay, no, that's another season. Okay, so we're going to do Psalm 24. Now, Psalm 24 is one of those psalms that I have to be honest, I'm normally less enamored of. There are a number of psalms that the nature of them is to be like, hooray! Isn't this wonderful? And generally speaking, I'm less. I don't like those as much. The poetry where King David, like last time, shares with us his troubles, shares with us his concerns, I find those poems to be much richer than the ones where it's just listing in how many ways we love God. But we do have to do both of them. But this one does have some interesting texture to it. So we will be taking a look at this poem. We'll look at some poems that are just, isn't God wonderful? But this one is like I said, is a little bit more textured because you have to try to figure out what's going on. As you can look at the way I put it on the page, this psalm has 3 parts to it. The first part is about God the Creator. That's the 1 and 2. The next one talks about who has the right to go on to the Temple Mount, and then the last part of the poem, the last 4 verses, are about actually going into the sanctuary, perhaps even the Kodesh Kodeshim. And so we're going to see what the order of the material is and what King David had in mind when he wrote this poem. This is one of only 6 psalms that begins with this formula, LeDavid Mizmor. LeDavid Mizmor. So the question is, and you can see I made that, I darkened it, and I darkened a couple of other lines as well. Hi, good morning. The Zohar, you hate to try to get shot from the Zohar, but the Zohar, maybe we should even leave these. Leave them over here. The Zohar says that when it says LeDavid Mizmor, as opposed to the more popular formulation, which is Mizmor LeDavid, when it says LeDavid Mizmor, it means King David started writing the poem on his own. And only after he started writing it did the divine revelation, did Ruach HaKodesh descend upon him. So notice he started writing the poem, and only later did God grace him with nevuah, with prophecy, with revelation, with Ruach HaKodesh. I'm not sure which term works best in this case, but when it says Mizmor LeDavid, David was himself either in trouble or depressed, and Hashem came to him with a nevuah, which he turned into a poem. So here, in our poem, King David wants to write the poem. Now, if King David wanted to write the poem, there must have been a reason. And so that gets also to speculation. Why did King David want to write this poem? And most of the commentaries believe that the end of the poem explains to us why King David wanted to write this poem. King David conquers Jerusalem. Now, we're not sure exactly when, but according to the municipality of Jerusalem, it was 1004 BCE. Because if you remember, in 1996, the city proclaimed Jerusalem 3000. They had all sorts of commemorations for the 3000th anniversary of King David's conquest of Jerusalem, which means that I don't know how they came to this number exactly. They may have voted on it in the city council. I'm not sure exactly where they got the number. Usually when you look in history books, they say approximately 1000 BCE. That's what you usually see, but the city decided it's 1004 BCE. I don't know whose cheshbon that was. I probably should look it up and see. But when King David conquers Jerusalem, he then decides, after a certain amount of time, whether it's a couple of months or even a year, he decides to move the Aron to Jerusalem. Now, since the time of Shmuel, the Aron had been in Kiryat Ye'arim. What do we call Kiryat Ye'arim? None of us, we all know where it is, but we never call it Kiryat Ye'arim. We call it Telstone. Very good. Telstone is Kiryat Ye'arim. So somewhere in the area of Telstone, which is like the third exit on the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway, is the first exit is Mivaseret, then you've got Abu Ghosh, and then you've got Telstone, Kiryat Ye'arim. So somewhere, what am I going to say? 12 kilometers, 10 kilometers outside Yerushalayim, the Aron was. And when David HaMelech conquers Yerushalayim, at some point he brings the Aron to Yerushalayim. Many, many commentaries believe that King David wrote this poem because he wants to bring the Aron to Yerushalayim, and that fits in with the last 4 verses, which we're going to do next week. Okay? So we'll hold off on that. We'll talk about that in greater depth. But that's why King David wanted to write a poem. King David has a plan. And before he can do his plan, he says, we can't just do this. We have to do this with singing. We have to do this with poetry. We have to do this with inspiration. So he sits down to write a poem, and then, according to the Zohar, divine revelation comes to him. And that's why the formulation, this rare formulation, LeDavid Mizmor. First, David's writing a poem, and then it becomes a mizmor, which means that mizmor, which, by the way, assumes music. Okay? Not every psalm has music to it, but since this poem is called mizmor, it's zmirot, zemer, that it was sung to music. The Levium, would play music to it, and so, but the musical part came from Hashem's inspiration. You know what I would love to know? I would love to know what King David wrote before he had divine inspiration, and where it was that the switch got flipped, and now we have divine inspiration. We don't know. We don't know. But since great poets work over the material over and over again, I think we can assume that the entire poem by the end is infused with Ruach HaKodesh, which is why, of course, it's in Tanakh. So, LeDavid Mizmor, King David wanted to write a poem to honor the bringing of the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark with the 10 Commandments in it, to Yerushalayim. So he starts to write a poem. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu graces his efforts with divine inspiration, with Ruach HaKodesh. And this is how the poem begins. La Hashem ha'aretz umlo'o. To God is the earth and everything in it. Okay? This line is very famous because of a Gemara in Brachot. The Gemara in Brachot asks, how do we know that we have to say brachot on food before we eat food? How do we know? Now, we know that the blessings on food come from the rabbis. We believe that they were written by the men of the Great Assembly starting in the 5th century BCE. They're not min Torah. They're not from the Torah. However, we believe the Torah wanted us to say blessings anyways, so we have two different psukim in Psalms. One is, everything belongs to God. The other is, Hashemayim Shemayim L'Hashem. This is from Hallel. We said it this morning. Hashemayim Shemayim L'Hashem. The heavens belong to God. V'ha'aretz natan livnei Adam. So how do you reconcile the contradiction between two different verses, both written by King David? One is, God owns everything. The other is, humans own what's down here. It's only heaven that belongs to God. The answer is, one is before we say a blessing, everything is God's. Once you ask for permission, then it's ours. It's like God teaching us, a lesson. Like we say to our little kids, you can have it when you say please. It belongs to the parent. But the parent is so willing to share it, wants to share it, but does want to teach the child gratitude. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us, the children of God, teaching us how to behave. You have to ask nicely for things. You have to show gratitude and appreciation, and therefore it then becomes it's not a halachic formulation, but it's a beautiful idea. So L'Hashem ha'aretz melo, everything belongs to Hashem. When I say everything, what I mean by that is, the next term is hard to translate. Tevel v'yoshveva. I can translate the yoshveva. The tevel is harder. My translation in front of me from the JPS, I sort of wish I brought the altar, I didn't check. Tevel, he translates it as world. That's how, okay? That's how Koren has it. That's Rabbi Weinreb. What does the Art Scroll have in the end of the first sentence? Okay, thank you. So he says, the inhabited land. We usually talk about Kol Yeshvei Tevel, all the inhabitants of the world. There are more. They're fine. Okay. There are more copies over there. When we say Kol Yeshvei Tevel, all the inhabitants of the world, so that's what the Art Scroll is saying. That Tevel doesn't mean the entire world. It only means the habitable portions of the world. The extent of the world where humans can live. We know the world is split into 3 sections. According to Chazal, this is our position. There is Yam, which we're going to talk about in the next verse. There is oceans. There is Midbar, areas that are very, very difficult to inhabit. The best translation for Midbar isn't desert, it's wilderness. Because not only is, the Sahara a midbar, but Antarctica is a midbar. It's very hard to live there. The Himalayas, the Brazilian Amazon forests.
Midbar Yehuda.
Midbar Yehuda. That is a desert, though.
But it's called like that.
I know. So that really is a desert. We use the term for desert too, but it means any place, even a rainforest, that's hard to live there. That human habitation would be very difficult. So the first phrase is, God owns the entire earth. But I'm going to extend that. He specifically retains ownership of the areas where humans can live, Tevel, and the inhabitants thereof. In other words, we have a relationship with Hashem for 2 reasons. Number 1, He created and continues to own heaven and earth. Number 2, He created us. But there's another question you could ask. And it's almost like King David was anticipating the philosophy called deism. What did by the way, a majority of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence were deists. Jefferson, Franklin, and many of them, not Adams. Adams was actually a very religious Christian, but many of them were deists. They believed that God created heaven and earth and then left. and then is no longer around, and now God has given it over to us to develop it. Now I think there's merit to that position, but we believe that Hashem continues to be involved in the world, and we see that in verse 2. A deist would say verse 1. God created the earth, God created where we live, God created us, and then he left it for us to take care of ourselves. A deist would be very happy if the poem ended after verse 1. But we disagree. We believe that Hashgacha, God's divine supervision over the world, continues. And we see that in verse 2. And here's how verse 2 goes. Ki hu al yamim yesada. You know that Tevel, that habitable land we talked about? God did something remarkable. He founded it. He established it. He set it up. A yesod is a foundation. You see some of the buildings going on in Yerushalayim. I mean, they're everywhere, right? They're building like mad. Okay, the first thing you have to do to have a good, stable building is you see the foundations. They dig these deep holes in the ground, and then they put these pylons. You need a good foundation, right? So God founded the earth on the waters, and I want you to know we consider that to be remarkable. Because if you've ever gone to the beach and you personally try to stop the beach, the water from coming in, you take the sand, what do you notice about land, earth? It gets dissolved in the water. And it's very hard to do something, to build something on the water. It's very, very difficult. And God to put the continents, look, the earth is 80% water. I don't know if that's exact, something like that. And it was very hard for God to set up continents because the water should have washed over it. And right now, according to people that are doing the measuring, it looks like the waters are coming back over the land. Another reason not to live in Florida. In 100 years, it's going to be underwater. But anyways, what's going on is it's a miracle, or it took the divine planning of God to make the continents rise above the waters, because the entire earth should be covered with water. I want to add something. This is what the rabbis say. I want to add something else. One of the things that makes the earth so amazing is water. And you could say this verse differently than the rabbis did. Because the rabbis weren't thinking about habitable planets throughout the universe. They were only thinking about planet Earth. When the scientists are out there, astronomers and astrophysicists are out there looking for planets, they look for planets in the Goldilocks zone. What's the Goldilocks zone?
Not too hot.
Not too hot, not too cold, just right. And when they say just right, they mean just right for water, for there to be liquid water. As far as we can tell, look, there's a lot going on out there we don't understand yet, right? As far as we can tell, life needs water. It needs water in a water form, not ice. It's got to be liquid water, okay? And we are the only planet in our solar system, and we're having trouble finding planets in other solar systems that are in the Goldilocks zone. One of the most amazing things from the travels into space, whether it's Gemini or Apollo, whatever one it was, and you see the photographs back of Earth. Everything is black and colorless. Earth is beautiful, blue. It's blue. And that's because of the water. God set up our land, our earth, our habitable planet because of water. We are a water-based civilization. We are a water-based species. So that's a different interpretation than the rabbis give. And not only did God set up the land in such a way that it was solid and you could walk on it next to the oceans, but he also understood our need for water. Va'al naharot yichoneneha. And our civilization, our earth, our habitable locations are established, are set up, are firmly built next to rivers. When you travel around, in New England, growing up in Boston, when you travel around New England and you look at the old towns that were started, at the time of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, you'll go back to the 1600s, 1700s, all of the towns were set up by rivers. Even the towns on the coast, like Salem and Boston and Plymouth, also had rivers. And then you start going inland. You go to Merrimack and Lowell and Andover. They were all on rivers, because rivers did two things. Number one, it gave you water. Number two, it gave you power, because they already were using water power for making grain, and then later for making textiles. And it also later gave them transportation. So civilization requires continents, but also requires cities on rivers. And we believe that the continued human life on earth is only because God is helping us continue to have rivers flowing down to oceans which don't incur onto the land. So the first line is, we should appreciate God because God created us and everything. Line 2 is saying, we should appreciate God because God is continuing to supervise and take care of us. We couldn't continue to exist without him. So King David, as he's getting ready to bring the Aron Kodesh to Yerushalayim, is explaining why we must worship Hashem. And there's two reasons. The first reason, because he made us, and therefore owns us. And number two, and much more importantly, he continues to take care of us. We have oceans and water and rivers and rain, hopefully this Tuesday, because of divine supervision. And we are recognizing we couldn't continue to be here without Hashem. So it's not enough to just say thank you to Hashem. We have to continually pray to Hashem, because we continue to always need God's divine support. This could have been a poem all by itself. Be like a haiku, I guess. This could have been a poem all by itself, because it says a mouthful. But it really only introduces the fact that we owe tremendous amount of worship, allegiance, kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's a beautiful beginning for the poem. Now he asks, it looks like one question twice. And if you notice, not only in verse Gimel do we have me twice underlined, but when you go to Chet and Yud, we start asking again, who? And there are two different questions about who. The first who is, who has the right to ascend and come near Hashem? Who feels that they have the merit, that they deserve the honor of coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of worshiping Hashem? Who feels that that's question number one. Question number two is getting to the nitty-gritty of who is it that really deserves our love, affection, and worship. Well, the second who's are asking about God. Okay? The first who is asking about you and me. Rivka and I have a friend who used to be very close with Rabbi Lichtenstein. And so he used to spend Shabbos about once a month. I think he still does, because there's another friend there that's quite ill. And after davening a couple of years ago, he was walking home from Shul and was helping Rabbi Aaron, who toward the end didn't move that well. He was still Baruch Hashem moving, but the Parkinson's was taking over and didn't move that well. So he was helping Rabbi Aaron get home. And they were walking home, and as they were walking in one direction, there were yeshiva guys walking in the other direction, and very loudly discussing, this is beautiful when you think about it, because they could have been talking about, the Maccabi scores, but they weren't. They were talking about who has, is it really permitted? Is it really permitted to go onto Har HaBayit? I mean, there's a big topic these days because, Rabbi Yehuda Glick is trying to, get more and more rights on Har HaBayit. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, even though I'm not one of those who goes on Har HaBayit. I love Rabbi Glick very much. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. But they're asking, geez, what's the halacha? Can we really go up there? And they're saying this, and they're walking in one direction. Rabbi Aaron is walking with my friend in the other direction. Rabbi Aaron walking in the other direction. And Rabbi Aaron turns to my friend, and he says, Of course you can go on Har HaBayit. All you have to be is the things described. He starts quoting our pasuk. Naki kapayim, valevav, asher lo nasa l'shav nafshi. David HaMelech explains who can go on Har HaBayit. You just have to fill out the, it's like you want to go on Har HaBayit. Here's a questionnaire. Fill this out. Are you this and that and the other? And now we have to go through what are the requirements. Now we say halachically the requirement is you have to go to the mikveh. And then you can't go to certain places. Now you have to know where the boundaries of where, if you have tumat mate, if you've come into contact with a dead body, you can't go beyond that line because we don't have the red heifer, whatever. So you have to know a lot of things. But Rabbi Aaron's point was, no, you can go in Har HaBayit if you fill the requirements in verses Dalet and Hey. And that's what we're going to see right now. What questions do you have to ask? By the way, when you used to go in Har HaBayit, what was the question they asked? They only asked one question. Did you go to the mikveh and you had to give them a token, an asimon? Remember asimonim?
Yes.
From the phones? Remember I have one. I saved one. The term asimon came from the temple. It was the coin that you gave to the temple guard that you had gone to the mikveh. When you went to the mikveh, the guard in person that was in charge, where the women's mikveh, gave you a coin saying you went to the mikveh, okay? And then you gave that back to the guard at the gate, so you could go on to the Har HaBayit. And that was the term asimon. It was a siman, right? It was a siman. It was a sign that you had gone to the mikveh. So this is the question that you should really ask, okay? You'd think they'd ask, what's the wind speed velocity of a sparrow? Okay, here we go. Verse 3. Mi yaleh b'har Hashem. Who can go up onto God's mountain? Now, this can be either figurative, which is a beautiful idea. Who has the right to ascend that mountain of holiness to be near Hashem? This is how we use it. Who is it that can come into the lofty presence of God? But of course, he meant it literally. Who can go onto Har HaBayit? He bought Har HaBayit from Aravna. Aravna was the king of Yevus. King David conquered Yerushalayim. He could have taken anything he wanted. But outside the city walls in those days was Ha HaMoriah, which Aravna, the king of Yevus, owned as a separate area where he made wine. It was a threshing floor for grain and a gat for wine. It was his storehouses outside the walls. And King David went to him and said, I want to buy it from you because I want to build the Beit HaMikdash there. Now we know he doesn't get permission to build the Beit HaMikdash. We're going to talk about that next week. Okay? The difference between King David and Shlomo HaMelech. We're going to get to that next week for the last 4 verses. So we'll leave that in abeyance now. But he buys it. He doesn't want anyone to say that we stole Har HaBayit. He doesn't want anyone to say that our ownership was in any way in dispute. We bought it with cash and got a bill of sale. I wish we could find it. Okay? And we have, therefore, our ownership of Rabbi. He didn't want there to be any question over whether we owned it or not. We know, according to the Rambam, that when you acquire something through kibush, conquest, if someone else comes by and conquers it from you, they're the new owner. We have the same halacha, by the way, of theft. If you steal something and you have it long enough and you change it, you improve it, it becomes yours. You're kona through kinyan, through kona through shinoi, it becomes yours. Eventually, thieves own what they have. But if you steal something from a thief, it's not considered theft. So if you conquer a city from a conqueror, it's yours for the time being. But if somebody buys it, if you got it through permission, which is why the Rambam says the Kedusha that was given to us by Koresh, Cyrus, the king of Persia, emperor of Persia, because he gave us Yerushalayim and the area around it, that area has higher Kedusha, higher sanctity than the Kedusha of Joshua, which disappeared. Joshua conquered Israel. And when someone else conquered him, we lost it. The new conqueror owns it. But that's different than when you have undisputed ownership of it. And that's Yerushalayim. King David didn't want there to be a dispute over whether he didn't care if there was a dispute over the rest of Jerusalem. He didn't want a dispute over Harabayit, the Temple Mount. So who can go onto that holy sanctuary dedicated to Hashem? Har Hashem. Umi yakum bimkom kadsho. And who can stand in God's holy place? Now, what are the two questions? Now, you could say they're asking the same thing, and it's poetic just to repeat it. I think, though, that there are two wonderful interpretations to this. The first interpretation is very, very simple, and I love saying this on Sunday. Generally, this is the Psalm for Sunday. And most people say the reason this is the Psalm for Sunday is the first verse. Because on Sunday is the weekly anniversary of God's creation of heaven and earth. So, La Shema Aretz Malo. That's a beautiful reason for reciting this verse. I like another reason. Who can go up onto God's mountain? Very nice. Second part of the question. But who can stay there? It's one thing to go there for a visit and then go back to your regular behavior. We want to be able to go up there and maintain that level of Kedusha. We just ascended, hopefully, God's mountain on Shabbat. What do we say on Sunday morning? Oh God, let me stay on that high level of Kedusha for the rest of the week too. Let me maintain some of that sanctity I had on Shabbos. Because it's so easy, to go back on Sunday to disreputable behavior. And we don't want to do that. We want to maintain some of that Kedusha that we had on Shabbos. It's not going to be the same, but we'd like it, at least on a sanctity level, to be similar. And I think that interpretation is beautiful. I happen to love that interpretation. And when I read this poem on Sunday mornings, that's what I think. That's my thought when I get to this line. There's another interpretation that I think is attributed to the Radak. I'm not 100% sure who I saw it in, but I think it was the Radak. And I think there's a very beautiful interpretation that I never had seen until I was preparing for this year. So you should know I'm learning from this experience too. The first part of the line is the same. Who goes up to Mount Umiyakum b'makom kodsho, and who can establish the sanctity of God's place? The second half of the line is talking about who is going to succeed you. In other words, some people go up to the mountain and they don't worry if there's going to be another generation to go up after them. They only take custody of it for the time being. They don't think about what's going to happen next. And the second half of the line, according to the Radak, I think it's the Radak, is not only do we have to go up there, we have to train the next generation to replace us up there. whatever it is that we've achieved, we have to want from our children minimally that. In other words, the starting point for our next generation, whether it's our children or our students or anybody that we have influence over, right? Could be a neighbor's child, it could be a nephew, it doesn't make any difference. That we want to make sure that there is kiyum, that there is establishment of a kayam, of an everlasting presence in the sanctity of Hashem. And I think that that interpretation is very, very beautiful, and I think very, very powerful as well. That we can't rest on our laurels. We have to always look forward to the next generation, and that's the second half. So who are these people? Okay, the first part is Niki Kapayim. Niki Kapayim, clean hands. Literally, clean palms. How does he translate it here? Clean hands. It's not really hands, it's palms. Okay? The reason I like to say palms is, one of the expressions that we use, for corruption is greased palms. He greased the palms, right? And when you think about, when someone wants some sort of a tip or bribe, they stick out their palm. The palm is open, and that's a kaf, because it's going to take something. So whose palms are naki, are clean? Now, we can take this, by the way, on both levels. It also means you're supposed to be pure when you go to the Temple Mount, so clean in a physical sense, but it really means who's innocent of theft, who's innocent of corruption. Don't look at politicians. No politician should be going on the Temple Mount. Anyways, so first of all, you have to be innocent of other people's possessions. And then, uvar levav, and your heart must be pure. You have to be good in your behavior both inside and out. Look, we know many people, I was a teacher for over 40 years, so I mean, I saw kids who in class who were very careful to mind their P's and Q's and to be very respectful. But behind your back and outside of school, they were ruffians or whatever, and there was lack of sincerity in that behavior that you saw in the classroom. But then you saw the kids that they were the same all the time. They were always good kids. And if it made no difference whether you saw them in the classroom or on the playground or in the supermarket, they were just good kids. They were always doing it. So the first one is Niki Kapayim. They were in every outward way, they were Beseder. But Valevav means that you could see that purity went all the way through. I don't know if he's the originator of this idea, but the place where I've seen this idea in the Sfat Emet, he defines a tzaddik as someone who is toho kabora. A tzaddik, a truly righteous person, is someone who is inside is like their outside. What you see on the outside is what's going on the inside. That's the true definition of a tzaddik. And he explains it on a psalm we're going to get to probably in January, the Psalm for Shabbat, because what fruit do we compare tzaddikim to? A tamar. And what's great about a tamar, a date?
Palm tree.
Well, no, it's not palm tree. No, I'm not going back to palms. No, what's great about inside and outside, that they look the same. There's almost no skin on a date. So tzaddik tamar. So a tzaddik is like a tamar. What you see on the outside is what you see on the inside.
Is that true about fresh dates too?
Even fresh dates, a little less so, but it's true of fresh dates too. The outside looks like the inside, and the skin is very, very thin. And when they get overripe, they start oozing. The inside comes out. Okay, so that's why a tzaddik is compared to it, and that's the first half of line 4. that they're naki kapayim on the outside. Their behavior is innocent, and that's wonderful. But also, their insides are pure as well. They're not doing it to trick you. They're not doing it for ulterior motives. They're doing it because they're really good people. Asher lo nasa l'shav nafshi. And there's an argument over whether this word should be nafshi or nafsho. We all say nafshi, but we have historical evidence that nafsho, but it works out either way. It means the same thing. Who didn't take in vain, nafshi, that's God's name. Nafshi, God's soul. In other words, didn't take God's name in vain. This is, of course, this is the third of the 10 Commandments, okay? Don't take God's name in vain. Now, what does taking God's name in vain mean? It doesn't necessarily mean, v'lo nishba l'mirma means don't swear falsely. Not swearing falsely and taking God's name in vain are two different things, okay? In other words, taking God's name in vain means that you truly don't have proper respect for God's name, that you only use it in proper ways. I think in some ways we've gone overboard with this a little bit, because we don't say God's name at all anymore. In other words, the original name Yud Kei Vav Kei, which we don't pronounce and only was pronounced in the temple, number one, we don't use that. But I think Sfardim are right. When you want to say thank God, we Ashkenazim say Baruch Hashem.
Say Todah La'el.
Todah La'el. It's a prayer. There's nothing wrong with saying God's name. Okay? And we get very careful about writing God's name on paper to the extent that, okay, there's no Aron Kodesh yet. I was in Teaneck, and it bothers me. They have an Aron Kodesh, and they put brass letters on an Aron Kodesh. I mean, it's going to be there forever, right? It's brass. And they wrote, hey, instead of God's name. Why? It's in brass. It's going to last longer than the prayer books. We put God's name. Now, we've become perhaps a little bit too careful about using God's name in disrespectful ways. I think we've gone a little bit overboard. I have tefillah on my phone, and the app that I use hyphenates Elokeinu. Why?
You can change it in the settings.
I can change it in the settings. I'm going to try to. Why? Rav Moshe Paskin 40 years ago that God's name on a screen is not considered erasing God's name. It's because it's not written. It's just electronic impulses. So why would we not want to write God's name when we're? I know on a piece of paper like this I have put a dash in the name. I forgot when I did Ashrei. I feel embarrassed because who knows what's going to happen to these pieces of paper. So the first half of this line was supposed to be, you got rid of him. Very good, Yaakov, thank you. So anyways, got what I wanted. What happens is we see that we're supposed to be extremely careful with God's name, not use it in vain, not use it for no reason. And then the second part, v'lo nishba l'mirma, and not make oaths for deceptive reasons. And we see many examples in the Gemara of people who technically weren't lying, but made an oath that was really an oath of mirma. The famous example that a guy would take a walking stick, okay, and he would put cash. He would hollow out the walking stick, and he put cash inside it, coins inside the walking stick. And then he'd go to court, and he owed somebody money. And he would ask somebody else to hold the walking stick while he took his oath. So he'd take the oath, and they'd say, do you have this man's money? I said, I swear on God's name, I don't have the money. Okay, and he didn't. I mean, he technically...
Yeah, but in the story, the guy grabs the key.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, right.
Why did he take it? Why did he take it in the cane? at all if he was not prepared.
Well, he wanted to protect the money. You leave it around. You leave money around. Gold coins around. They're going to get lost or stolen or whatever. So he had it with him, but he didn't want. Okay, the story goes on that they out tricked him, and that they got him. And there's actually a place in Yerushalayim that's on the street that goes through the Arab Shuk that goes to Rabbi called Rehov HaShalshelet, where they used to give the testimonies, and they had They used to have a hook there, and and it would tell whether the guy was lying or not. But forgetting about that midrash, that's me. And not only that, I don't swear falsely. In other words, I'm innocent in my behavior towards people. I am pure on the inside. I am careful about my use of God's name, and I never swear in such a way to mislead people. There's no mirma. There is no chicanery, deceit in my swearing. Yisa bracha me'et Hashem. Now we're getting to like the more positive result of being such a good person. The person who bears, receives, carries with him blessing from God. We believe. I'm not sure I believe. That's why I said we. It's hard to see this always. But Chazal felt in many midrashim that we could notice the people that were carrying God's blessing. I'm not sure that I have that kind of eyesight. I'd like to. I don't know. I think I'm someone who's been fooled. In hindsight, there were people that I thought were really good people, and then later on I found out, boy, was I mistaken, right? Okay, but we're talking here about the fact that such a person who reaches this high level of kedusha, sanctity, tzidkut, chasidut, of righteousness, yisa b'racha me'et Hashem. This person bears upon themselves the blessings that come from Hashem. Utzdaka melokei yisho. And righteousness comes from God for the salvation of such a person. Now, salvation is a term we talked about once before, so I'm going to say it again, but very, very quickly. Salvation comes from this root, Yeshua, but the root of that word is sha'ah. And the word sha'ah, which gives us, by the way, the modern Hebrew word for time, right, the word for time, but it comes from the 4th chapter of Breshit, when Cain and Hevel brought their sacrifices. And one sacrifice, that of Hevel, it says, Vashem sha'ah el minchato. God turned towards. So Yish'ah, and the other one, God lo sha'ah, didn't turn towards. What sha'ah, salvation in Judaism, means receiving attention from Hashem. The ultimate gift of God is God's attention. That we feel that God is paying attention to us. I was just with Rivka with some grandchildren over Shabbat, and it's clear all the kids want is your attention. Sometimes we're not as generous as we perhaps should be, but that's all the kids want is your attention. And ultimately, that's all we want from HaKadosh Baruch Hu too. We just want God's attention. We want to know that God's listening and whatever. So that's the end. Utzdaka, that's the righteousness, melokei yisho, that his salvation, it comes from righteousness, that God grants this person righteousness. I'm going to start the next verse, but I don't think we're going to finish it. We're theoretically out of time, but I'm going to go a couple more minutes. Such a situation where there are these good people who want to ascend God's mountain and want to stay there and want to pass along this goodness, Zeh Dur Darshav. This is a generation of those who seek God. This is a generation of seekers. Now, I want you to know this term is very, very important. We're going to parallel it in the next phrase with the word bakesh. And we're going to have to see, I don't know if we'll get to it today, we have to want to see the difference. What's the difference between Doresh Hashem and Bakesh Hashem? What is seeking Hashem and requesting Hashem? Okay, we're going to get to what the difference is, but just so happens I'm learning Amos with somebody back in America on Skype. It's a lot of fun. And it makes me feel like I've conquered one type of electronic material. And in Amos, he's the first poet, the first Navi that predicts that the Jews are going to go into exile. All the other prophets before him, well, they're talking about, Shmuel and Eliyahu and Elisha. They told the kings, you better be good or bad things are going to happen to you in your dynasty. But Amos is the first of the prophets that talks to the entire people, the regular man on the street, and says, you're going to be exiled. And then the question comes up, well, how do I get back from exile? How do I get back from being distant from Hashem? Exile both being physical and spiritual. How do I get back? And his answer in chapter 5 is a sixfold repetition of the term Doresh. Seek God. If you seek God, then you can come back into the presence of Hashem. Seek. That's the beginning of it. And so that's what David HaMelech is saying about this generation of people. I believe it was his generation who wanted to take the Aron Kodesh to Harabayit and wanted to build the Beit HaMikdash, and everyone was really moved by this enterprise, by this endeavor. And he says, wow, Zed Dur Darshav. This is a generation of seekers of God. That's what we want. I on a personal note, everybody's name has a pasuk. In the Achko Sidurim, they have the pasukim, and there's a minhag to say the pasuk when you finish Shmona Esrei. Now, the minhag is because when you go to heaven, you may forget your name, and if you said the pasuk throughout your life, you'll remember it. Okay, that's very nice. I do what I look at it. I've just finished my davening, and now I'm signing it. I'm putting my chatima at the bottom of my tefillah. That's what I think when I say my pasuk, Dirshu Hashem v'uzu, bakshu fanav tamid. Seek God and be strong. Request God forever. That's my David. Dirshu Hashem v'uzu, bakshu fanav tamid. The minhag with the pasuk, it starts and ends with the beginning. But with David, it's perfect because David is a dal at the beginning, a dal at the end. So is the pasuk, and every pasuk has a vav in it, right? So you got the name David.
My pasuk has my name in it.
Has your name in it. That's unusual, but it happens. Okay, but every day I remind myself, Dirshu, you have to seek Hashem. That's what Hashem wants. And then it says, Mevakshe Panecha Yaakov Sela. I want to talk about, the only thing I want to talk about today is the word Bakesh. What do we mean by Yaakov and Sela? We'll talk about next time. What's the difference between Dirshu Hashem and Bakshu Hashem? We want both. Amos emphasizes Dirshu rather than Bakesh. But although there are many arguments about this, the simplest differentiation between the two is very significant. Dirshu is more cerebral and intellectual. Try to look for God. It's like a puzzle or a game, lahavdil. Okay, you're trying to put the pieces together in such a way. It's more of, a brain teaser. Where can I find God? How can I find God? Okay? Now, it could be Torah study, and it could be totally cerebral, but it could be more, physical, trying to put the pieces together, go to the right places, and okay? But it's more of an act of thoughtfulness. Bakasha is different. Bakasha is much more emotional. And it depends on you. I'm gonna say, for me, Dirshu Hashem is more important. I want everybody to have both. But for some people, the emotional attempt, the emotional approach is more important. And so it's different personalities. Okay? And it's not that one is better. You have to find the ones that best fit into your, into your personality and your predilections. But personally, to me, maybe it's because of my pasuk or whatever. I like the idea. I have to think about this. I want to find Hashem in science and in nature, and I want to, learn. But some people just no. Yes, I want that too. But what I just want that sense of I'm trying and that effort, and it's a more emotional, touchy-feely approach. And I don't think one's better than the other. I think people have to decide which one is more their forte. But I hope all of us have both. That even if we're only into the touchy feel, I hope we also want to get the intellectual material. But even if we're I think it's more common that people who are very, very intellectual quite often just poo-poo the more emotional approach. I think they're wrong. I think they're making a big mistake. Some of the people that impressed me the most, and I think of, I mentioned Rabbi before, and he definitely had this where he was extremely smart, right? He was like the definition of smart, but many times he would, end, what he had to say with an emotional approach to the material. And I think we need both. I think everybody needs both, and I think we make a mistake when we think we can, just achieve our, spiritual goals with one of them, and that's this pasuk. Zed Dor Shav. It's a generation that seeks actively and intellectually, okay, and energetically. Mavakshe Panecha Yaakov Sela. We'll talk about what Yaakov and Sela mean next week, okay, and seek your divine face. Okay, seek in a more emotional way. Okay, we continue next week.